This week, Josh Snow from ExtraHop is with us to discuss implementing CISA's Shields Up guidance. Then, Catherine Ullman from the University of Buffalo joins us to talk about how the best defense is a good offense. Finally, in the enterprise security news, NordVPN raises $100 million and becomes the first Lithuanian unicorn. Coro lands a $60 million Series C for small business-focused security. AirGap Networks closes a funding gap with a $13.4 million Series A. Porsche lands a $12 million Series A to bring MFA to machine-to-machine API traffic. We'll delve into that, see if we can figure that out. TrueID lands a $9 million seed round to take a stab at using SIM cards as an MFA factor, authentication factor. Ex-Alien Vault employees raise funding from Ballistic Ventures to form Nudge Security. C-Metrics scores a $6 million seed round to provide better KPIs to CISOs. An essay on trust, the two sides of say and do. Ubiquity continues to alienate the security community with its attacks against Brian Krebs. Why an option to edit tweets is a terrible idea. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
CyberGRX brings a revolutionary approach to third-party cyber risk management. Using sophisticated data analytics, real-world attack scenarios, and real-time threat intelligence, CyberGRX provides a complete portfolio analysis of a company's third-party ecosystem, helping the world's leading businesses prioritize their risks and make smart decisions. Interested in learning more? Head over to securityweekly.com/CyberGRX and demo the world's biggest third-party exchange. Imagine this scenario. You're out of the office unexpectedly, and a colleague pings you because they need access to some system you have credentials for. Now, my listeners would never send passwords over email or Slack. But what about your coworkers? How many organizations out there are sending logins back and forth in plain text? Worse yet, how many just store all of their logins on a shared spreadsheet? Keeper Security's password management platform locks down logins, payment cards, and more in a patented zero-knowledge encrypted vault. Sign up for a Keeper free trial today. Visit securityweekly.com/Keeper.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy No Housework Day. Sorry if you're hearing that too late today. This is episode 268, recorded on Thursday, April 7th, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is Mr. Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler? How do you feel about housework?
Oh, how do I feel about housework? Obviously, it's a no-brainer. I can't stand it, but you should have told me that this morning.
Same. I didn't find out until after I'd already done some laundry today, so I screwed it up too. But I actually like housework. That's when I do a lot of my audiobook and podcast listening.
I wish. I don't like housework in any way, shape, or form. I try to avoid it, and I outsource it whenever possible.
Yeah, it's good to have kids, right?
Absolutely. That's why I had them, 100%.
It's also National Coffee Cake Day, National Burrito Day, National Beer Day, and National Alcohol Screening Day. With the exception of the alcohol screening, it sounds like a typical food diary entry for me.
Oh, yeah. Yep, got it.
Tyler taking a sip there. Caught you. Busted.
Caught me.
All right. So let's see here. Don't think I have any. Let me refresh here, see if I have any interviews for you before we jump into our first, or any announcements for you before we jump into our first interview. We do. Let's see. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA Conference 2022 full conference pass. The RSA Conference will be live and in person in San Francisco, June 6th through 9th, 2022. Security Weekly will be there and in full force, delivering real-time live coverage and interviewing some of the event's top speakers and sponsors. To register using our discount code, you can visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2022, and you can use the code 52UCyber. So it's 52, the letter U, and then cyber. We hope to see you there. All right. So our first interview today is sponsored by ExtraHop. And we've got with us Josh Snow from ExtraHop, and we're talking about common sense steps for implementing Shields Up. And I actually had to ask what Shields Up was. We'll jump into that in a moment. But Josh is a principal sales engineer over there at ExtraHop and has over 15 years of experience in both networks and security. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me. I'll be at RSA as well. I'll be signing 8x10s if you want to come get one, Adrian.
Ah, nice. I'll add that to my my to-do list for RSA. Are you going to be on? Are you going to have your own booth on the floor where you're signing and handing out those glossies?
Exactly. Would that be amazing?
That would be amazing. I feel like that's something that's probably happened at some point. You know, maybe not you or me, but maybe like Kevin Mitnick did something like that at some point.
If I ever strike it rich, I swear that's what I'm going to do is like come up with a fake company or, go there and sign 8x10s. And everyone's like, what is this? It's like, all right, let's gather around and figure it out.
It must be important. Yeah, I should get one too. Maybe it'd be worth something. Tyler, do you travel around with photos of yourself to hand out to fans?
No, why would I do that? I typically have the life-size cutout that gets set up behind me.
One-upping us as always. Thank you, Tyler.
As always.
All right, so I think it's kind of a great start. I did have to. I wasn't aware of Shields Up. I'm sure some of our listeners are. It was something that I had missed, and I think that's probably a good place to start here, Josh. If you could help clue in those of us that aren't familiar with this guidance from CISA.
Yeah, so it's been really validating for ExtraHop and network detection and response in general. So obviously, I've always been really passionate about what ExtraHop does, packet-based, looking at security. It can't be evaded. But the Shields Up came out, and it talked about common sense hygiene approach of ports and protocols as the first line of defense. And it's not always what we necessarily focus on security, but hygiene matters. It's like doing your sit-ups, your push-ups, and practicing a good diet. And that the Shields Up is really saying, hey, let's stop doing things like SMB1. Really look at your ports. What do you have talking to routable IPs? Doing that can really reduce your attack surface and help you mitigate risk across the organization. I feel like sometimes in security, you want to run to the latest fancy CVE or IOC instead of saying, hey, what are some of those common sense based approaches that we can just really reduce our risk for the business?
Yeah, and it's been kind of both refreshing and a bit surprising to see such great advice coming from the federal government. In the past, it's been things that were just so vague and general that we didn't really get useful guidance from them. But they've really hired some great talent over there. They've managed. They've figured out the formula, figured out how to lure people over there and help them out, and been really impressed with what I've been seeing from them.
No, absolutely. And I think one of the keys that when I was reading through the Shields Up guidance, not only the practical guidance for hygiene and understanding, what do you have, baseline, your infrastructure, looking at those common sense ports and protocols, it actually even calls out that the executives in the industry need to be held accountable too. They need to lower the threshold. I feel like a lot of times executives at organizations that not only I sell into, but anyone who's out there doing projects sometimes don't necessarily see how bad the risk is. And I feel like it puts it in plain terms, and it literally calls out in there. It's like executives and CISOs and CTOs need to reduce that threshold for purchasing and implementing security projects, whether that's ExtraHop or anything else. Because in today's environment, we've got to get the right people and the right tools on the front lines as quickly as possible.
And, we've been for years now talking about fundamentals and hygiene and things like that. And, I think maybe part of the problem in the past is, even stuff like the CIS top 20, does go into some details, but some of the guidance here hasn't been, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be prescriptive per se, but some people need a hand to hold, somewhere to start, some way to prioritize what they're doing here.
Yep.
So, do we get that from Shields Up here? Do they kind of guide you through, step one, step two, or, here's a batch of things that you should do first? Like you mentioned, turning off protocols that are just going to scream low hanging fruit to anybody who comes across them.
Yeah, and that's exactly right, Adrian. It's like we're looking for things, and what I like is the Shields Up is practical guidance that isn't overly technical, but it also, to your point earlier, it's not totally out of touch either, right? Like you said before, the federal government, frankly, before it Shields Up, I wouldn't pay a lot of attention because it was overly verbose or caught up in some crazy framework that, frankly, I just didn't care that much about because it wasn't practical. This stuff is very practical. So things like ensuring devices are properly configured for, RDP. So if you have RDP open, which is remote desktop protocol, you really need to audit that. There's so much malware ransomware that's going to leverage that. And if me and you are working on a project and we leave RDP open to the internet or misconfigure it, we need a way to validate that and turn that off and ensure that that's not going to be causing us a problem down the line. So constantly auditing for things, not just point in time with the vulnerability assessment, but making sure that things like RDP are on lockdown and disabling things like SMB1, like that's a notoriously easy variant for Windows file shares to own your environment with ransomware. I mean, that's been out for 10 plus years with NotPetya and some of the stuff that came out of North Korea. So if you have that in your environment, that's a major risk. And so you need to understand that risk and then talk to your executives and directors and say, hey, we have this. Here's the applications that are running it, and then come up with a plan. Not even if it's day one, but I know some of these applications can't migrate right away, but at least you understand the risk and you can start to work your way away from it and understand, hey, what do we use? Do we move to V2? Can this application support it? Start walking through that process. Don't just let these protocols sit in there for years and years, because it's only going to make the lives of people that are, in conning ransomware gangs and ransomware as a service, their jobs easier when you have these protocols that are ancient and don't have a lot of authentication behind them.
Yeah, definitely. And does it actually list out some of those protocols? Is it fairly detailed in what it tells you to look for there?
Yep. So it's basically there really is not a lot of reason to have SMB1 in your environment anymore. It's a very old protocol. It's, disabling ports and protocols where RDP on machines and devices isn't being used, but you have it open. The other one that we've kind of it's at ExtraHop, we've taken a little bit of liberty with this because there's a hard coded list, but then there's also, an interpretive vulnerable protocols and things running in clear text, stuff like IPv6. Obviously, that's great. Base 16 networking is great. But if you don't have your firewalls and other tools looking at IPv6, are you really auditing that? So you really want to understand why you have those protocols in your environment. And then if you can, turn it off. SMB1, RDP, unsecure SSL. It goes down the list to make sure that you're doing the best job you can. And what's great about doing the hygiene is it's usually not a huge lift. It's just understanding what is running it and then how do we migrate it. And then we constantly audit for that. So for instance, like an old SSL certificate, we can see it, we can change it, we can validate that changes happen, and we've become more secure for it. Constantly looking for detections and CVEs and IOCs is kind of a race to the bottom in some ways, because there's always going to be some detections. Mm-hmm. The hygiene portion is something that you can constantly do as your security exercise to really reduce your attack surface and your chance of really being owned.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, I love the website. It's almost kind of like, it reminds me of an infomercial, but not in a negative way, in more of a positive way, where like at the top there, it's got a hotline. It's like, it tells you organizations should report incidents to, 1-800 got hacked. It's not 1-800 got hacked. It's
and if you hack now, we'll shut down SMB1 for free.
Yeah. And then further on down, like they've got stopransomware.gov and follow the steps.
Yep.
And I've been hit by ransomware with an exclamation point. Like the link has the exclamation point in it. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
We could have used this 10 or 15 years ago in this industry. And
one of the big things that they call out that I think is tough for a lot of organizations is, can you really answer the question of what devices you have communicating with the outside world and what are they saying? It's good to audit that, right? So the devices inside your infrastructure that are communicating with the outside world, looking at the protocols and the communications that they're running is very important, because eventually that's how things are going to get in. So if you can audit those and understand and get a baseline of that behavior of these are the devices that need to talk to the outside world, and these are the normal ports and protocols that they use. And when something moves beyond that or is anomalous or does more bandwidth than it usually does, you can start to get an indication that, hey, this is not necessarily what should be happening. And this could be the beginning of an attack or a security risk that I need to be aware of.
Yeah, and we're actually going to talk about that a bit in our next conversation. We've got an experienced incident responder coming on, and that's something I've seen a lot, and that I would use in training incident responders is understanding that baseline, understanding what's normal. Because the first time you take a packet capture or, maybe look at a vulnerability scan or delve into your logs, there's all kinds of stuff in there that looks like you're getting attacked, that looks shady, that looks weird. Totally. And if you don't know what your normal weird is, then you don't know what the abnormal weird is. So super important to, it shouldn't, the first time you look at a packet capture of your environment or, like the kind of input that you give your customers with your devices, shouldn't be during the incident, right?
I'm using that in a sentence on my next pitch, Adrian. Know your normal weird. Maybe that'll be on our website.
Yeah, because everybody's
so true though,
weird.
Right?
Like I'll go into I remember being a pen tester, PCI QSA, going into an environment, being like, "Hey, did you guys know that every time somebody sends an email to SMTP on your Exchange server, it gets broadcast to the whole network in plain text, and everybody can see every one of those emails?" And they're like, "We got some weird stuff going on, but we didn't know about that one. That was unknown weird to them. That was not part of it." And
that's a great point. Is that's part of what Shields Up wants to do is like, that's an unknown weird, but you can get that, you can start to eliminate or you're switch that over to like SMTP SSL with not a lot of work. And then all of a sudden you can get a baseline of normal weird very quickly, because you can start to be like, all right, there's no reason to have that. And that's part of what Shields Up really talks about is like, that's a very quick way to become more secure, because then I'm not reading your PDFs or your bills, and I can start to do a phishing campaign for social into your accounting department to get a fake bill paid, because I can all of a sudden read in your SMTP across the network, I can read your emails and look at the accounts payable, receivables, those type of things.
Yeah, I mean, like if I'm if I use my kitchen a lot and I want my kitchen to be functional, and I can't get to the the typical oil that I use for sautéing or something like that, because I'm having to get past 20-year-old bottles of truffle oil and like clear out the junk basically. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's so much easier to monitor your environment, to threat hunt and things like that if you turn off all these old protocols, these systems that aren't being used anymore. Getting rid of all that tech debt will make your kitchen a lot more functional.
Yeah, Adrian,
I love that. I love the term tech debt, right? It's and getting a guidance, and it's not something to where it's just a light switch. I mean, you've done this in your past life, Adrian. It's like, but if you understand it and see it, and then you can work on it and say, all right, what are these systems? Let me talk to the owners of the systems. Can we migrate those off of it? Let's look at a plan. What is the cost of upgrading the hardware to do it? It's worth the effort to be able to mitigate the risk over time. And frankly, it can make more sense than sometimes, going after the IOC hunt or something. Because as you've seen, some of these attacks, there isn't any IOCs or CVEs for 6 or 9 months. But if you can eliminate that point of entry, that protocol, you've made yourself more secure.
Adrian, did you really just equate cybersecurity to your home kitchen and specifically attacks to Truffle Oil?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good connections between Truffle Oil and maybe even security products that cost a lot of money but don't do a whole lot for you. Like maybe you use it in 2 or 3 recipes, and that Truffle Oil, I know it was expensive, guys, but it does go bad. If it's been hanging around 6-7 years, you need to throw it out.
All those Michelin 5-star restaurants love their Truffle Oil, so I'm just saying.
It's true.
And now in your mind, replace Truffle Oil with that security vendor that you have, that isn't producing any value for you, that you need to just clear out and make way for things that are more effective and useful.
I think I'm seeing a future where we have our super producers creating a Truffle Oil graphic for the vendors that don't matter.
Truffle Oil, it does have that kind of unique, like it's like the kitchen gadgets, like the one-use kitchen gadgets, like the thing that removes the top from the strawberries instead of just using a paring knife or something like that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's definitely analogous to some issues that we have in our industry, I think.
Well, I've been really passionate about outcomes, not tools. Like I feel like in the security industry, we're really addicted to tools. I have my SIM and I have my EDR or whatever it is that people want, but we don't think enough about the outcomes, and we get locked into this train of thought that frankly, the vendors have done a great job of marketing to all of us to be like, what is the outcome I want? I want to be more secure. I want to reduce my risk. All right, let me weigh these tools or these options against that rather than weighing, the actual functionality of the tools. I think that's a mistake that we've made in the industry over time. And that's part of what Shields Up is trying to correct, is the outcome, no matter what you decide to do, the outcome is going to be more secure because you're going to reduce the likelihood of an attack by reducing the use of these protocols.
Absolutely. And something I advocate a lot is running through scenarios also, taking those, negative outcomes too, understanding how they happen, and kind of working back from that. Okay, what tooling do we need to detect that kind of thing? If we do get hit with it, how can we quickly, effectively, contain it, eradicate it, shut it down, go through those steps of incident response? Because incident response is stressful enough, but not being prepared for it and not knowing how to use your tools in, the heat of the moment, that's really stressful.
What would you say that, Adrian, in your past life, when you were doing pen testing, if you took an incident and then worked your way back, there were times that Shields Up probably would have had one of those RDP port or someone came through, right? So that would have followed that scenario, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually heard, I forget where I heard this, but fairly recently, somebody told me that there are cyber insurance companies or policy holders, or not policy holders, but the insurance companies will drop you if you have an open RDP port. Something as simple as that.
Totally.
No, your policy's void with that open RDP port.
If you can even get coverage anymore here, it's so expensive, right? It's like truffle oil.
Yeah. Bringing it back. Love it. All right. Let's move on a little bit here. Let's not get too bogged down in kitchen ingredients.
Hey, actually, I got a topic. Adrian. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your show, the Threat Insight Show from ExtraHop? What are you doing over there on your podcast?
Hey, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. So during the pandemic, I kind of created my own YouTube channel because I really wanted to speak directly to customers and prospects. I mean, I love our marketing team, but having conversations and I would have an idea about, hey, this is how you use ExtraHop to do this. And it started to evolve into, there's an attack, Spring for Shell, Log for Shell, whatever it may be. How would we respond to it? I'm trying to take that challenge. And I do these, 3 to 7 minute videos, kind of walking through it, finding a blog post and then showing what we would potentially detect in ExtraHop, as well as common use cases like SSL decryption and how to use, troubleshooting, networking, slowness, those type of things. And my latest one, little humble brag, has had 20,000 views with Spring for Shell. I was pretty excited about that.
Yeah, no, I looked at your numbers, compared them to the numbers I get on my podcast, and I feel ashamed. Well done.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, for the listeners that are looking for it, just to save you the Google search, if you go to YouTube and look for Threat Insights with ExtraHop with Josh Snow, you'll find it from there.
Hey, you could drop a link in the Discord also if you've got
great idea. Handy. I'll do that for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of Spring for Shell, I've seen stuff saying it's underhyped, it's overhyped. What's your take on that?
Yeah, this stuff comes out and it's hard to know. I mean, as well as I do, it's hard to know. So we all have to take all these threats seriously. It's almost like, the modern world we're into, every threat has got to be taken seriously. So we saw this come out and we knew this vulnerability is very similar to Log for Shell, Log4j. And our Threat Insights team, one of our head developers, actually used it and owned an Apache Tomcat environment. It was really fascinating in our blog. And so we actually developed a detection in a number of hours associated with it. But more importantly, so the detection looks for the exploit attempt. But the thing that I like about our threat briefing for it, and even if you don't have ExtraHop, you could do this, is just inventorying where are my Apache Tomcat servers, and I want to make sure that they are patched, right? And so that's the key, is all right, making sure there's no one sitting in the corner, or Adrian and Josh all of a sudden spun up something for some project and it's exposed because we ran some old version and we don't care. That's what's really important. And so that way, it's an easy way to mitigate that risk, because all of a sudden you're on the latest and you don't have any stragglers associated with it.
Yeah, I think for Log4j, we knew it was everywhere. Totally. I think Veracode had done a study back in 2018 that somebody very quickly found and pointed out that something like a third of all Java projects had were using Log4j, but I don't think it was as clear with how many people are using this library.
Agreed. And I think that was part of the fear. And then all it takes is, but we did some internal studies and we found that it was out there for quite a few of our of the things that we looked at. But it's one of those things to where if you can take some common sense approaches and just make sure you're patched, you can eliminate the risk even if you never use the framework. Yeah.
And it's not a library, right? It's like a UI framework. Is that what it is? It's been a long time since I've even seen it.
Yes, and and I'm a network engineer by trade, but from my understanding, what you can do is you can access the object and the child objects, and then you can actually start to insert commands in a shell, and that's when you can start to really wreak some havoc. Is like, all right, now that I've got shell access, then I can do change mod, or I can start to scan internally and start to do some nastiness. So,
kind of jumping back to this hygiene. Recommendations from Shields Up. How would you, at like a high level, break down some of those hygiene tasks? You mentioned shutting down, ancient vulnerable services. I think we did a really good job in previous decades of getting rid of clear text protocols. Like Telnet and stuff like that. Like there's a really big push on that. But then. Obviously there's still some really, there's still SMB v1 out there because there are old devices, old printers and stuff like that people aren't getting rid of. But beyond just old protocols, or I don't know if you have a list in your head of kind of the high level categories of what hygiene comprises.
Yeah, no, totally. And it's a fantastic question. So SMB1 is obviously a big one. I would say, and I thought the same thing. It's like, it's kind of analogous to as you thought your parents knew everything as you grew up. As you start to become a parent yourself or start to grow up in the security industry, you realize that not a lot of us know a lot of things. I mean, of course, we're smart and stuff, but these clear text protocols still exist in environments today. Almost every environment that I look at has clear text LDAP, which is exposed passwords, unencrypted FTP. There's still quite a bit of telnet, right? I think the pressure on the business, Adrian, is so much to produce that people are just putting these things out there without not necessarily following, a security framework to be able to ensure that it gets audited and there's not a whole lot of constraints or controls around it. And so understanding and auditing what you actually have and working that back through the framework is extremely important. And then there's also insecure SSL. I mean, SSL version 3 was owned with Heartbleed years ago. And then there's all kinds of security malware that takes advantage of insecure SSL transactions. Like I said, IPv6 is obviously it's highly secure, but understanding where you have that and making sure that's going through your firewalls and actually being audited is important. And then the other one that we really look at is threat hits. So I still see vendors today, have a big geo map up and be like, you're being scanned from Russia because Russia's the big bad guy right now. Like
pew pew
that's the silliest. Yeah. It's like pew pew. Like it's the silliest thing, right? Because like when was the last time if you have just geo blocking on your firewall, like boom, that can just come straight, that's going to get blocked. So really what you're looking for is IPs that have been reported in the security industry as distributing malware, Log4j or Spring4Shell. And at ExtraHop, we actually integrate with those open source sticks and taxi feeds. And that's the right way to try to mitigate some of that risk.
Yeah, I mean, I equate that to, again, like this idea of kind of cleaning out all the clutter, that tech debt, like every now and then these magazines come in. I'm like, why am I still like, it's been over a year since I've opened one of these magazines. I don't know why I still have the subscription. Like
or the streaming service. You've got every streaming service because I have kids. Like it's like I need to go get rid of that. Right?
Yeah. Go through your budget and clean stuff out because it just adds to the clutter. Absolutely. Yep. I actually talked to somebody the other day who said they worked with a company that just had like a zero tolerance policy for tech debt, and the moment something was end of life, end of support. Like they were ripping it out. They didn't care how much of a lift it was going to be. Like that was just like one of the company's first principles. Is that?
Could you imagine a world like that? That'd be wonderful, right? It's so cool to hear that that's happening.
Adrian, that's 100% how I tackle my subscriptions here at home for television channels, for everything. Literally every month when I see it come through on the bill, I cancel it because my wife or my kids don't watch that subscription for 6 months, and then all of a sudden they'll want a TV show. And I always tell them, go ahead, you can always subscribe to anything you want. And then I literally cancel it the next bill. So it's just one way to always pay it down.
So like, smart.
Zero tolerance subscriptions.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally.
Now bring one of your family members on the podcast and we'll talk to them about what that experience is like from their perspective.
Yeah, the ad hoc. Exactly.
Honestly, they don't quite realize it. They just forget, like, because they'll go and want Disney Plus 6 months later and like, hey, that's not working. I'm like, oh, just resubscribe. Like, okay, click.
I just want to watch Breaking Bad. I've got to sign up for a whole new account again.
Click. It's 2 clicks. Just click.
Yeah. So quick.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is probably
so easy anymore.
Yeah. That's great. So I've heard other countries have very similar guidance to this. So CISA is actually well aligned. And it's good to hear, that the rest of the world is kind of here, because we're kind of again, like certain industries tend to straggle behind. We hear certain regions of the world, are 5 years behind or 10 years behind, where others are with security. So it's good to hear that. First of all, is that correct? And if so, it would be good to hear.
Yeah, no, it's definitely correct. And even if they're not exactly aligned, the guidance here is practical enough to where even if we were in a European country or an Asian country, we could still implement these things because they're ubiquitous across technical organizations. They're good behaviors to have no matter where you live in the world.
Yeah, I think it's hard to have that perspective here. Like I forget that. I guess I just assume everybody's got their own best practices and guidelines, but I suppose to some extent, like the stuff that comes out of the U.S. government gets used abroad as well.
Sure. Well, and I hope that happens more because, like you mentioned before, Adrian, like this is one of the first times where I've seen this be something that's clear and it's practical. Usually it's bogged down in nomenclature and too deep into frameworks for a broad use. And this Shields Up guidance has really started to up level that. So they must have, gotten their game together and realized we need to get this message to be more clear so it can touch more organizations.
So, talking about some of these old protocols, some of these bad practices, some of this hygiene we need to clean up, do you have kind of a, I guess like the current state and maybe over the last 5 years, over the last certain period of time, I guess the beginning of the pandemic was 5 years ago, right? Feels like that. Do you have a sense for how far we've come or how bad this still is at the average organization, how far behind they are?
So I would say that this whole situation that's happening in the world right now is putting more eyeballs onto Shields Up, which is essentially obviously just, hey, raising awareness around security and also putting the spotlight on hygiene. Hygiene has never been enough of a focus in security. And so I think that with the Shields Up guidance, vendors like myself and security practitioners can start to say, hey guys, clear text passwords and we can start to maybe move towards that customer that you had mentioned, that it's like, hey, when this is, this application can no longer be in here if it's running an ancient protocol that's been exposed or owned. And so clients are able to mitigate more of their risk and understand, all right, this could equate to being attacked. And like we've seen it time and time again with ransomware and other things, to be able to, hey, this is important things to be able to reduce our attack surface. And so I haven't necessarily seen it get better. But I think we could be at the beginning of that, where the federal government is actually taking a stand on this and saying, hey, NTLM, SMB1, TLS1, FTP, Telnet, these are all low-hanging fruit that you need to take action on right away to remove from your environment.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point to wrap the conversation on here. Now that CISA kind of has people's attention, they're doing things like Shields Up. They've got this, they've got eyeballs on them. They've got people used to going to them and looking at their, we didn't mention that list of vulnerabilities they have. They effectively have like this top 20, top 30. I forget how many are on it now. They keep adding to it. But if you do nothing else, make sure you don't have these couple dozen vulnerabilities in your environment, right? Because we're seeing these used every single day. So
Yep. 100%.
Yeah, good stuff. Josh, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and just to brag on our production crew, sometimes we go off on these tangents and they build graphics while we're actually talking. think Gus had one for today's conversation. Yeah, there it is.
Absolutely love it.
That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
Oh my God, I love it.
Ingredients, deceptive marketing, and bad practices. That's great.
It's an all new formula, though. Remember that. All new.
All new.
That's hilarious.
All right. Yeah, thanks again, Josh. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop to learn more. Much thanks to them for sponsoring this interview. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about being a better defender by learning to hack with Dr. Catherine Ullman from the University of Buffalo.